Okay, sorry about that, everyone. This is a funny first point that I haven't added to my slides. Is bring the stuff to connect to the laptop to whatever you're presenting. So I didn't do that today. I left it at home. So thank you to Alec for lending me his laptop so I can do this. So I'm Chris Sherry. I've given a few talks in my time, but I'm by no means an expert on this. But I've done a lot of reading about some tips on this, and I've seen a lot of talks. I've seen some done very well, and I've seen some done quite poorly as well. And I've picked up quite a few things along the way, and I thought I'd share that with everyone. So start off, the first slide. So your first slide will be looked at longer than any other slide. So I've got a title and I've added my contact details along the bottom. So if people want to tweet about this talk while I'm giving the talk, that would be cool. And there's a nice illustration there as well. So your first talk, first of all, everyone can do a talk. If you ever think like, oh no, that's too much getting up, standing up here, doing this, I thought that originally, and it's not that difficult. And it's a really great thing to do. A little quote here from Jake the dog. So I'm going to read the screen. Sucking at something is the first step to being sort of good at something. And I really like that quote because it's very true. So find a local user group like this one. There's plenty in this area. We're really lucky to have so many good user groups around. And give your talk to them. Practice speaking. They're all very friendly. You lot are very friendly. It's not a scary place to come and do a talk. And they will appreciate you putting your time into putting a talk together. And they'll be really up for sharing information, which is why we're all here. Find a speaking style. So I've seen a lot of speakers. Ross Tuck here is my absolute favorite. He gave the keynote at the first Redevelop conference. If you've not heard of Redevelop, by the way, it's this Friday. Talk to Tom about. Yeah. He was absolutely excellent. And his talk was just about advice, which is kind of a bit like this talk. But I can't talk as well as he can, but I learned a lot from watching him and the way he delivered things. Al Murray is another talker, if you like, that I quite admire. So he doesn't give talks like this, he's Canadian. People who do any sort of public speaking, you can learn a lot. And I don't talk the way Al Murray does. I'm not here pretending to be a pub landlord, but on the other hand, he has a very distinct way of speaking. And by watching him, I learned a lot about how to speak myself. Choosing a subject. So it's okay to pick a subject that you don't know everything about. In fact, it is the best motivator for learning a new thing, or learning something you've picked up recently, learning it really well is to do a talk. So, for example, if you say to Alec here, hey, I'm really interested in React Native, for example, I want to do a talk on that. You don't have to be an expert in it. By saying, I want to do a talk about it and setting a deadline, that's the best kick up the arse to actually go and really research it and find out more about it. When I gave my first talk, I didn't know half the things I know now after writing the talk and giving the talk and doing more research on top of that, as I do now. So it's a really great way to learn as well as share information. Just don't pick a subject you know absolutely nothing about, because that's going to be really hard. So when speaking, have your slides online already is my first tip for this. So my slides are online at phpdorset.co.uk, where I gave this talk originally. And that's a cool thing to do for people if they want to follow along on their phone or their laptop or their iPad whilst you're speaking. They can follow your slides. So if you're speaking a bit fast, they get lost a bit, they can follow along. So it's not a mandatory thing, but it can be quite a nice thing to do. Be passionate, be enthusiastic about what you're talking about. Ultimately, people aren't going to remember what you said in your talk. What they're going to remember is how you made them feel about what you're talking about. So you can make them feel excited or intrigued about something you're talking about. If you can have the opposite effect as well, you can make people feel bored or kind of uninterested in what you're talking about. So they'll remember the feeling but they won't remember what you said. Make it personal. So a lot of what people talk about can be found in textbooks or on university courses, but people have come to see your take on it. So they want to know how you feel about it. So words like this work really well, saying that making it about your experience of the subject, because that's what they won't find in those other places. Use your hands. I use my hands kind of a bit too much maybe, but they're a great way to kind of add some movement to when you're talking. If you find you're using your hands too much though, especially if you're trying to like draw diagrams kind of with your hands in the sky, then that's a good example of something that maybe you should put into a slide on a diagram instead. Someone who's great at using their hands is this guy. So I don't like this guy at all, but I have to admire that he's been taught very well how to speak in public, and he uses his hands extremely well, especially when he wants to make a point, that he'll kind of pause whoever is speaking at the time with his hand to make his point. Things like that. It's quite interesting. Yeah, it has, but it's interesting watching him. Yeah, there's probably much better examples of people who use their hands than him. He's just very topical at the moment. So movement. So you can move around. So if I was to move around the stage a bit, that can be quite good because it stops people falling asleep. Add some movement to it, but standing still is absolutely fine as well. The main thing to avoid is repetitive movements. So if I kind of rock back and forth like this for my entire talk, I'm going to be like a metronome, and you guys are going to start falling asleep pretty soon. Practice with the mic. So conferences are unfortunately pretty poor with their microphone setups. They don't give the speakers any real training on how to use their mics. It's something I'm trying to help improve. But if you can get hold of a mic to practice with, that's a great thing. If you know you've got a lapel mic, then wear a lapel or a collar with a shirt. It will attach much better than onto a t-shirt, where it's kind of, wherever you put it, it's always the same distance away from you. So you haven't really got a lot of play there. If you ever have to speak with a handheld mic, please don't hold it in front of your face, because people need to see your lips as you're talking. And if you've got something in front of your face, people kind of switch off a bit with that. It's fine to just hold it underneath your chin. You'll still get the volume there. So know the length of your talk. People really appreciate that, especially if they're talking straight after you, that you're not going to run into their allotted time. This has happened to me before, and I've had to jump over half my talk. So that wasn't very fun. And this is a good way to keep on track. So this is generally in my speaker notes, is to time your talk, but not just time the whole lot, time intervals through your talk. So you know whether you're behind or ahead, and you can tell yourself whether you need to speed up or whether you're going too fast as well. And allow some room in your time. If you say it's a 25-minute talk, then it should be a kind of at least a 20-minute talk. So, you know, there's time to run over there. Slides can sometimes speak for themselves. I'm guilty of this. So keep it brief. If sometimes you can over-explain a slide, and by that I mean blah 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 blah. You get the point. Designing slides. Build first, design later. This was really hard to kind of, when you first get stuck into Keynote or whatever you're building in, to get a grip on. But trust me, if you start building your slides like this, and this is a screenshot of when I was building this, just put the content in there first, get the order right, and then add the design later. You'll thank yourself for it. Design is optional. So this is also fine. It's pretty as you like, but black text on the white screen works just as well. Some of the best speakers I've seen have had slides like this, but no Comic Sans. It's good to keep this consistent throughout, so don't do what I've just done and jump between lots of different kind of themes. It can be quite jarring. This is particularly nice, as it's guaranteed to work on any projector. Whereas there's a slide later actually that describes that. Know the room. Visit it if you can. That's a really good one. If you can go to the place, like here, I've been here before, so I know exactly the environment I'm talking in. Ask for the specs for the screen. If you know it's going to be 4:3 or widescreen, you can design your slides around that. Here we go. So this is an example of what this slide might look like if I was on a really bad projector. So I'm okay here because I've used quite a blocky text, so you can still make that out. But if I was trying to show some code here, it's not going to show up very well using the color theme that I've used for these slides. So again, the black and white would actually work much better here. Check the sight lines. So here we've got a flat room. I mean, everyone should be able to see because nobody's really that far back. But if you're speaking somewhere that doesn't have rake seating, then go to the back of the room, sit in the back seat and imagine people's heads as well and see how much of the screen you can see. So this bottom bit might not be able to see your screen. And if you're putting all your important information down here and you're trying to reference it, people at the back can't see it at all. It's not a very good talk for them. I usually put this sort of stuff down here. So Twitter, joined in, that sort of stuff. Stuff that might be there throughout the talk as well. If people miss it, then it's not such a big deal. It's usually on the first slide or the last slide. So it doesn't matter so much. That's not why I'm going to put my big kind of revealing code sample that changes people's perceptions of things. Go easy on the gimmicks. I've seen a lot of people they get an idea of something that would be really cool as a theme for their talk, but then they try and force their content into that theme and the content kind of gets lost in the gimmick. So yeah, just tone that down a bit maybe. High resolution images, this makes a big difference. So this works particularly well here. At Mobile Dorset, I was on the screen and it didn't look so bad, but the projector, this is clearly a low res image. So if you can use high res images, it might look fine on your laptop, but you've got to think about what that looks like on a massive screen behind you. Creating sections, this is a nice way to keep thoughts organized. So you're not jumping around topics too much, and it's easier for the audience to follow. Perhaps show your sections in your slides. You don't have to do this. This is something I like to do, so people kind of know where we are. It's like putting chapters in the book, I guess. Delivering the content. Highlight with opacity. So it's really bad if I want to highlight something to try and use the laser pointer, because nobody really wants to see this flying around. And it does work on this screen, but if this was a LED screen, it wouldn't work at all. So you can just highlight if you know what you want to highlight, you can highlight it in your slide by using opacity as an example. There's other ways you could just draw a circle around it, but it's much nicer than trying to use this thing. Panning across large images. So here, if I wanted to show you something about Russia and something about the USA, this is a huge image, and at this size, you're not getting any detail out of it. So we can make it bigger, and then we can pan across it to show the different things that we want to see, and that looks a lot better. You can actually see what you're talking about. And it's really nice to try and stay in the slide deck if you can. So if you're doing a code demo, maybe you do have to go out of the slide deck. But for most things, there's really not any reason why you need to go out of it. If you want to show off a website, relying on the Wi-Fi is always a bad idea anyway. So take some screenshots and use that, and you can move about the website through your slides rather than the actual browser. This is my favorite one. So play animations once. So now you're not listening to me talk, you're watching a cat on a Roomba. So yeah, just make them loop once, otherwise this is going to be the center of attention, not what you're talking about. Don't be a dick. This more be sensitive. So try and say things in a positive way if you can. I know a lot of this talk has been don't do this, do this. It's very hard to do this kind of talk and be positive all the time, but it's not everyone has had the same experience that you have. Not everyone knows the same things. Try not to assume what people should know and what people shouldn't know about things. That's mainly my point there. Avoid assumptions. So these are really bad words to use. So if I was sat here going, everyone knows how to use Composer, for example, not everyone does. That's certainly not here anyway, because that's a PHP thing. But it's really easy to fall into these traps, and you will alienate your listeners if someone sat there feeling like, everyone does know this, how come I don't know this? What's wrong with me? When there's plenty of people around them that don't know that either, and it can develop imposter syndrome. So try and avoid these words if you can. Don't leave your laptop unattended. So I did this, and Dave added this slide for me. So thank you, Dave. That's a great tip. Okay, so this is coming on to the final bit of my talk, which is about code samples in slides. So this, one of my biggest gripes is watching technical talks and not being able to follow them because the code samples are just impossible to read. So my main point, if anything, from this talk is that your slides are not your editor. And you'll see what I mean by that. So my first tip is to avoid screenshots. 2 reasons. There's a lot going on here with my editor that is not what I want to draw focus to. But also, if I wanted to change anything about the slide, I can't. I have to go back to my browser and take another screenshot. It's just difficult to edit if anything changes. So for your own sake, it's not a good thing to do. So this is a kind of code sample that I've seen this appear in slides like this. And this is pretty difficult to follow. So I'm trying to talk about something called twig in here. It's impossible to really follow that. So ellipsis, I don't need all of that code. I don't need the entire file that I've written to demonstrate this. There's only a few lines here that I need to talk about. So I've just put the ellipsis, the dot, 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 to suggest that there is stuff in between there, but it's not important. And now I can have everything a bit bigger as well. Monospace fonts make a big difference, particularly for things like slashes and special characters. They don't really look very good in fonts that aren't monospace. They're harder to see. And we use them in our editors, so it makes sense to use them in the slides here. If you can break it down, so go bit by bit. So I'm talking about this register function here to start off with, and then I'm talking about the get function afterwards. They're on the same slide so you can see them in context, but I haven't just overwhelmed you with a lot of code at once. Syntax highlighting can be nice. It's a little easier to follow the code if you use syntax highlighting. From PHP Storm, for example, which is what I use, or if you use like any of the IntelliJ products, you can literally copy your code out of that and paste it straight into Keynote, and it will copy the syntax highlighting. But again, this is not my editor, so whatever crazy color scheme I'm using here might not really translate for everyone. So this is a bit better. It's higher contrast, so again, it works better on projectors. So these code styles, these color schemes, sorry, in your editors are there to make it really easy to look at your slides for 8 hours a day, whereas you're not going to be looking at this for 8 hours a day. You're going to be looking at for like 30 seconds. So high contrast is really good. I've used the GitHub theme here because it's familiar and it's high contrast, and it works really well on projectors. Syntax highlighting, again, we were just highlighting things, so I don't need to highlight all the code, just the bit I'm talking to. So the bit I've grayed out there is there for context, but it's not the bit I'm highlighting. It's not the bit of code I'm talking about right now. Again, so I've moved on to the next bit of code, and the bit of code that I was talking about before is still there for context, but I've used the colors to highlight the bit of code I'm now talking about. Can I make this simpler as well? So this slide talks a lot about things like a twig, for example, and maybe I don't need to talk about twig. Maybe I can just do that with a very simple bit of text that does the same thing. Okay, I wouldn't write my production code like this, but I'm not showing off production code here. I'm just showing an example. So if I can think of the simplest way to show that in the code, then that works better for you guys as well. Finishing the talk. So it's good to summarize. I'm not going to go over all the points I've just done because there's a lot of them, but if you've got a nice section in there and you can go over just the key points at the end of your talk, that really helps people remember those. It's also really nice to summarize because it lets people know you're coming to the end of the talk. So I haven't just finished here and gone, any questions? It gives you guys time to think of what you might want to ask me now whilst I'm rounding up. Chat to me in the pub about this stuff. You can get me on the PHP Dorset Slack. You can also get me on the Mobile Dorset Slack. And you can leave feedback at this link. So it gives you lots of options of how you can tell me how to make this talk better. Some people might not want to come up and chat to me face to face about this and want to leave anonymous feedback. Other people might want to actually come and talk to me in person. The more options you give people, the more likely you're actually to get feedback on your stuff. And say thank you. So thank you for listening to me talk. Here is a link to some of the tips that Rostock has about speaking. There's some really great stuff in there, particularly about preparing for speaking at a conference. It made a big difference to when I spoke at a conference. That's a really good resource. And we'll be putting these, I'll give these slides to the guys here and they can put them on Twitter. And to finalize, go back to the start. I just like to go back to the start. I don't really know why. I think it's a nice way to finish. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Cool.
So, thank you, Chris. I do have a question. How do you decide what you want to talk about?
I just said what you want to talk about. That's a really good question. So, the main talk I've given was literally what I was working on for the last couple of years. Stuff I didn't know before I joined the company that I was working at. And to me, it didn't really feel talk worthy. But then by going to lots of user groups and talking to other people. So my talk was about WordPress, and I went to PHP Dorset and I went to WordPress Bournemouth as well. And I found that actually lots of people were struggling with stuff that I'd found solutions for. It's not solutions I'd invented, but that's okay. There were things that I discovered and started using and had some kind of good tips on this is what works, but also here's some things that doesn't work so well. And that was information worth sharing. People wanted to hear about it. So that's how I came across that one. Again, with this talk, people were just talking to me and saying, hey, Chris, I've seen you do a couple of talks. Do you have any tips for me? And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I could give you some tips now, and I did. But I also thought I could put that on paper. I could put it up on a blog post, or I could stand in front of people and practice what I preach almost in trying to give a talk about doing talks.
Great, thank you. Cool. Well, good news. The pizza has arrived, and so we can tweet that. So if I can have someone with hands, you know, usually we do.
I've got hands. Yeah.
Great. And to help me draw the stuff into the back, and then we can throw pizza people.
Cool. Very good.
But if you don't have a badge on, can you put your name on? You put one on.
I should pause this for a second.
Yeah. That's right.